Being a police officer is a challenging role, a very challenging role. It's a tough job. The investigation became an obsession, and the pressures that were on me as an individual dealing with this was immense. I lived this. I lived it with my team.
He's one of Scotland's worst serial killers. I'd often wake up 3 or 4 in the morning. These things are churning around in your head. You become absorbed by it. And of course you're worried. You're worried that you've made a mistake. You're worried that you've overlooked something.
Horrible, horrible individual who sadistically killed 3 women that we know of. So I have no doubt he's killed other people. No doubt about it. He wouldn't stop.
It was really, really difficult when she went missing, first of all. Pretty much straight away we knew that something bad had happened. Then you wait 16 years to find out exactly what had happened.
You're always thinking about the victim, and you're always thinking why. Sometimes media glamorises the hard-nosed detective. We're not. We're human, and that's what I like to think, that I've done my best and have given something to the community and been able to help a family. This was a huge, high-profile, tragic case, and it's one I'll never forget.
In September 2006, a seemingly standard missing persons report was the start of an investigation that would span 17 years and reveal one of Britain's most prolific serial killers.
2006, I was a detective superintendent at Strathclyde Police. Angelika Kluk was a young Polish student. She was working and living at a church, St Patrick's Church. And she'd been there for some months, and she went missing. Her boyfriend at that time, he reported her missing, as did her sister.
When Angelika was reported missing, then the church and everyone else was concerned about her, so yeah, we would have been involved in trying to locate her and ask people if they'd seen her to report it to the police.
With missing persons, you tend to spend the first golden 24 hours looking for someone, you know, rather than looking at it as a crime. And 99.9% of missing persons turn up within 12 to 24 hours.
There was a close relationship between the church authorities and the police, so that in every way we could help the police.
Senior uniform officers were dealing with this. A chief inspector in uniform was dealing with it. And behind that also was the CID.
I was a senior forensic scientist, so a scientist carrying out work on all types of biology cases and attending crime scenes and attending court. And I took over call on the Monday. So on the Monday morning, I knew there was a girl missing.
The first couple of days, it's a young woman. She may have gone somewhere else, but it was out of character. It was out of character for Angelika. Her clothing and everything was still in her room in the church. Various bits of paperwork, like passport, things like that. So there was some concern. No reason for her to disappear. So they were treating this as a missing person inquiry. And that entailed interviewing everyone that was associated to Angelika Kluk, including the boyfriend who had been in Spain and had just returned from Spain, including the priest at the church, including other people that were in that area.
Angelika had come to Glasgow as part of a large number of Poles came to the city at that time. She came here to St Patrick's. She actually began to work in and around the parish as a volunteer, so she became as we say in Scotland, a well-kent face in the parish as a helper, and so became well known to many people.
By the middle of the week, I was asked to go and have a look round the church. We needed to try and find out that had happened.
They were dealing with a place of worship. They are dealing with a priest who is well known. So it's a balancing act as to how forceful they can do things in searching. So they had made a search of the church as would have expected. There was nothing to indicate where Angelika was. There was no CCTV. There was nothing at all. She'd disappeared. It became apparent that there was 2 people that she was last seen with. One of them was, at that time, the name he was using was George the golfer. And she had been with this man the night before she went missing. And this was an individual that had connections with the church, that took her out for golf lessons. He was interviewed. There was absolutely nothing to tie him into what happened there. He had been at home. He was not there. He lived in Aberdeen. There was one other individual that she had been with, and this was Patrick McLaughlin. Patrick McLaughlin was the handyman at the church. He was a trusted person. The priest, he trusted him. He allowed him to work in the church. He helped her. He gave a statement saying that he had been with Angelika Kluk, who he called his wee apprentice, and they had been painting a shed and working there, and he had been with her, and that was the last time he saw her. This individual, Patrick McLaughlin, stayed at the church after Angelika had disappeared, so it's the Monday night that he disappears. So where is Patrick McLaughlin? Has he left the church with Angelika Kluk? Are the 2 of them together? Has some harm come to Angelika Kluk? We don't know.
Patrick McLaughlin was the last person with Angelika before she disappeared, and neither of them have been seen for over 24 hours.
As it went on, concerns start to arise, and there is concerns. Where is she? Where has she gone? As a person who is close family, I could never imagine how I would feel if something like this happened to me.
David's team were now scouring the area for any trace of Angelika and Patrick McLaughlin.
They're looking at CCTV at train stations. They're searching. I mean, the UK is one of the most watched places in the world. They were looking to find out any sightings of Angelika. Nothing. No trace of her. Absolutely nothing at all. And her sister was putting pressure on the police, saying what happened there. And the boyfriend initiated the campaign to find Angelika Kluk, and he put out posters, and there was a lot of media involvement in that. It gave the wrong impression about Angelika. There was sadly a lot of attack on her character, about who she was, what she was. There is speculation. So people think it's just you're dealing with investigation, but you're not. You're dealing with the families, you're dealing with other people, you're dealing with the public. And the media intrusion was absolutely horrendous in this case. I, in my mind, had genuine concerns that harm had come for Angelika. And I arranged for a specialist search team to examine the church.
On the Saturday morning, 30th of September, about 8 o'clock in the morning, I received a phone call to say that the body of a young woman had been found beneath the church.
Under the carpet there was a small hatch, and under the floor a body of a young woman was found, bound, gagged, stabbed and beaten. We did not know who that was.
On the 30th of September 2006, Scottish police discovered the body of an unidentified woman beneath the floorboards of St Patrick's Church in Glasgow.
Sadly, I have to inform you that has now been treated as murder. All I can say it was a horrific and very, very violent attack on a young lady.
I was in my office at the headquarters of the Archdiocese of Glasgow, which is only 5 minutes' drive from here on the riverfront. Stunned, disbelief, how could that have happened? Surely not. These were the kind of voices that were raised at the time. Nothing like this had ever happened.
I had to take advice from experts as regards how to proceed with that, crime scene experts. Carol was significant, the most important person in that scene.
My initial thought was, this looks like a sexually motivated murder. For a sexually motivated murder, it's imperative that you examine the body where it is without moving the body, because you're dealing with body fluids. It was apparent she was bleeding and potentially there's going to be semen present.
Always in my mind, at that time, am I doing the right thing here making this decision? If we didn't examine her in situ, we were running a massive risk that we could destroy vital evidence. So I had to deal with that.
Every time you go out to a crime scene and there's someone dead, even though you're going out as a professional and a scientist, you're still very aware that this is someone's family and a loved one.
We have a young woman there. We don't know it's Angelika Kluk. We have her boyfriend who wants to know, is this my dear Angelika? The sister wants to know, the media want to know. How do you deal with that? That was a big, big challenge, because the questions that were being asked by people were, okay then, if it's not Angelika, are you still searching for Angelika? Of course we are, is the answer, because we don't know who that is.
You only have one shot at a crime scene. You can't go back and retake samples, so it's vital that you get everything absolutely spot on first time. The thought of going down underneath the floorboard was scary, and your immediate thought is, I'm going to go down there and get trapped. That's what it felt, because it was such a small, dark space. So the thought of going down there did make me really apprehensive.
Meanwhile, we're dealing with the scene. We're looking for Patrick McLaughlin, who's disappeared. So where is Patrick McLaughlin? So there was a big putting his picture out, so we've got a manhunt, so to speak. And that involved a huge media appeal, and a member of the public who knew him from some time previous contacted the police to say Patrick McLaughlin is missing sex offender Peter Tobin. There was a press conference arranged and various journalists were there, and during that there was an announcement that Angelika Kluk was last with Peter Tobin, and that is when the whole dynamics of that investigation changed. The big concern is you have a sex offender who is missing, who is the last person to be with a missing person.
Mr Tobin is considered a potential risk to members of the public. Any person who sees this man is advised not to approach him.
Under the floor of St Patrick's Church in Glasgow, forensic officer Carol Rogers was examining the body of an unidentified woman.
It was apparent that there'd been violence. I could see there was what looked like stab marks on her chest. She had quite a lot of blood on her hands, and there was blood around about her face and her head. So we took samples from her breasts, her chest, her abdomen. Her trousers were unfastened, so we took samples from the fly area. You're starting to build up a picture of what may have been the motivation, or what may have happened.
I could get a beam back by video and look it on the computer, and I could see what was happening, and I could see It's absolutely horrendous. We find out through jewellery and clothing that woman is Angelika Kluk, who was reported missing 5 days earlier.
Today brought the news that the people who laid those floral tributes were expecting but dreading that the body found hidden underneath the floorboards here was indeed that of the missing Polish student.
Shock is an overused word, but when someone is killed in your own community and when that person's body is discovered in the spiritual heart of that community, the beating spiritual holy of holies, you may say, of this area, then shock is not enough to describe what people felt.
We don't get a lot of these type of crimes where you've got a young woman who's been violently murdered and there's a sexual aspect to it as well. These are very unusual. These are the ones that always kind of hit you hard.
Being a police officer is very difficult to deal with horrible, horrible situations and live a normal life. And you have to switch off. But when you're dealing with investigations like I was dealing with, you never switch off. You never switch off. I was a very experienced senior investigating officer. I worked in lots of murder investigations throughout my career. This is one I'll never forget. And, you know, it's horrendous. But I always say, no matter what expertise I have, I don't have all the answers. And I'm only as good as my team.
In the black bag that we found on top of Angelika's body, we found numerous items, including heavily blood-stained clothing, a knife, which was still blood-stained but appeared to have been washed.
The place Tobin and Angelika had last been seen together was now a potential crime scene.
So we went to the garage, which is the last place Angelika had been seen alive. We started moving things to the side and noticed a tiny blood spot. So we got down on our hands and knees and drew a little circle around that blood spot. And as soon as we did, we started seeing another blood spot, then another blood spot, and we just started circling them. So it became very apparent quite quickly that there'd been some sort of an assault resulting in someone bleeding within the garage.
This is where Angelika Kluk was before she was killed, in this garage. She was subjected to a horrible, horrible assault. And then she was put on a polythene sheet and dragged all the way along here, through this pathway, taken in to the church, put there and put below the floor and dumped there like a bag of rubbish.
We had the blood matching Angelika on the table leg and the piece of wood in her head wound and the blood patterns at the crime scene. We examined the intimate samples over the weekend. We examined the swabs and noted semen on them. We then carried out DNA analysis on that semen and obtained a DNA profile. We ran the profile through the Scottish DNA database first, didn't get a match, so then we ran it through the national DNA database, and then we got the match, and the match was against Peter Tobin.
He had committed serious sexual crimes in England. He had raped, tried to kill 2 young girls in that area. So these were his index offences. A registered sex offender who had disappeared off the radar. When I saw the ferocity of what had happened to Angelika Kluk, I thought, this person has killed before. This was dangerous stuff, absolutely dangerous stuff. The priority is to find Tobin. This is a manhunt. We're looking for a dangerous individual. I'm thinking perhaps we have a serial killer on the run.
In September 2006, the body of Angelika Kluk was found buried under the floorboards of St Patrick's Church in Glasgow. The DNA of convicted sex offender Peter Tobin, who had been released from jail 2 years earlier, was found at the crime scene. The police suspected Tobin was a dangerous serial killer who could kill again.
You don't know what his victim profile is, and it was very difficult to narrow it down. In my mind, but the priority is to find Tobin. Do a huge media appeal, and that involved national TV coverage because we know his connections in England. A nurse in a hospital in London recognised a patient who was in there as Peter Tobin. They contacted the police. The Metropolitan Police attended and spoke to him, and he established that it was Peter Tobin. But at this time, there's no evidence to say he's killed Angelika Kluk.
The finding of seminal fluid on its own on a dead person doesn't necessarily mean that's the person who murdered them. Someone could have had intercourse a day or two prior, or even hours prior to being murdered.
Although police couldn't conclusively connect Tobin to the murder, he had breached the terms of the sex offenders register, so he was arrested.
Uniform officers go to London and bring Tobin back to Scotland, and he goes to the court in Paisley charged with breaching the sex offenders register, and that gives us time.
He had on a watch, which we examined and found blood on. A t-shirt, which we examined and found semen and other cellular material on as well.
It was later that week that we got the DNA hit, and that was the evidence.
The blood on the watch matched Angelika Kluk, and on the t-shirt, down at the bottom of the t-shirt, you would tuck into your trousers basically, we found semen staining, and that was mixed with a large amount of DNA matching Angelika Kluk.
You know, I was satisfied it was sufficient to charge him with the murder.
Tobin was behind bars, but David was convinced that he must have killed before.
After Angelika Kluk's body was found, I formed the opinion Tobin could be a serial killer. And to test that, I set up Operation Anagram. That was within a week after Angelika Kluk's body was found in September 2006. You don't get to 60 and kill for the first time. So, in tandem, a confidential investigation was set up to look at Peter Tobin with a view to establishing what else he had done. But I had to be very careful, because if the media found out that we're looking at a potential serial killer, that would have been prejudicial to his trial for Angelika. And very quickly we established that he'd stayed throughout the UK.
Operation Anagram, led by David Swindle, began to investigate Tobin's movements across the country.
This wasn't just about Tobin. This was to look at what happened in an area where Tobin was, to look at the profile of someone that was missing or someone who had been killed in the area at the time. So every single police force in the UK was involved, and all the police. So very quickly we established that Tobin had been in particular areas at particular times, starting to build the picture. Peter Tobin had stayed in 1991 at Robertson Avenue in Bathgate. He was staying there, and I know, it was a high-profile missing person investigation, that Vicky Hamilton disappeared in 1991 in Bathgate. That is significant. But where is Vicky Hamilton? Who by this time we think harm has come to. So they are working away in this, trying to link in. Tobin is a strong suspect. And we contacted, at that time it was the Lothian and Borders Police, the Edinburgh Police.
I was the divisional commander, the chief superintendent. So I was in charge of all of the policing of West Lothian. Vicky Hamilton went missing on the evening of the 10th of February 1991. It was a very cold, snowy, icy night. We'd had a very hard winter that year, and much of the road network round about Bathgate was closed to traffic.
Vicky was a go-happy-lucky girl. She was like any 15-year-old teenager, you know. She was loving life as she was going on. Boyfriends, obviously, at 15. And, yeah, she was a happy girl. The last time I saw Vicky, when she came down to visit me, she said that she was going to her sister's in Livingston for the weekend, to stay at the weekend. And she wanted to go on her own. It was late that night. Her mother phoned me and said that Vicky's never come home yet. I said, well, she never come off the bus that she should have come off with, which I told her to get. And we went back up the road, and the police sector come to the house that night and said that they'd been in touch with Sharon up in Livingston and that she had left to come home.
So this is the bus stop that Vicky would have caught the bus to Falkirk from. And of course, ironically, it's right opposite the police station. It was the coldest night of the year, literally. Vicky was a big girl for her age, but she was only 15. She would have never have survived in that climate. And we were desperately worried that she'd tried to make it, walked a half a mile out of town, got overcome by the cold, tried to seek shelter, crawled in under a bush or something like that. And if she'd done that, of course, hypothermia would have killed her within hours. Now, she had been seen several times in Bathgate, wandering about, asking people, trying to make sure she knew where the bus was. She was seen eating chips at one point in time, and it was very clear that she was upset and a bit nervous.
At that time, when she didn't come after a couple of days, I'm sorry to say, but I knew there was something not right, because that wouldn't be Vicky. Vicky wouldn't do that. Definitely, it was in my mind that there was something seriously wrong.
There were no strong suspects in the case of Vicky Hamilton. Where it gets tough is where you're dealing with cases like Vicky, where you cannot give answers to the family, and you cannot protect, and you have not protected, young girls like Vicky, purely innocent people. Then it becomes very, very difficult and very, very stressful. I heard that somebody had been arrested for the murder of Angelika Kluk in 2006. And we very quickly found out, of course, that at one point in time, in 1991, he had lived in Bathgate, albeit fairly briefly. And that, of course, set alarm bells ringing. We hadn't known about Tobin. He hadn't been on our radar at all. And here he was, living literally in our backyard at the crucial time. Once we discovered he'd lived in Robertson Avenue, and because of the way he had concealed the body of Angelika Kluk, there was a chance if there were any other bodies to be found, he would have concealed them.
As a result of that, his address in Bathgate was looked at, and in the attic of that they found a knife which had a small skin flake on it that matched the DNA profile of Vicky Hamilton.
It's been some time since I've been here in Robertson Avenue, and to try and imagine the horrors that must have happened in that house along there when Peter Tobin took Vicky Hamilton, absolutely horrendous.
Vicky Hamilton's purse, which had been found at the time of her disappearance, was now re-examined by police.
The purse was recovered in 1991. We could find nothing of any evidential value on the purse at that time. After Tobin had been arrested for the murder of Angelika Kluk, we did further tests on the purse, knowing what we were looking for. We found a saliva trace, a DNA saliva trace, which had not come from Tobin himself, but from a very close relative. Turned out to be his infant son.
So Tobin is a strong suspect for the murder of Vicky Hamilton. This is horrible. It's unbelievable.
They come to the house and told us they've got DNA. But I said, we've not got Vicky's body. We don't know where it is at this moment. Sick, absolutely sick. Hoping that they would be wrong, but obviously they weren't.
Despite finding the DNA evidence, police had not found Vicky's body. Operation Anagram's investigations continued behind closed doors, while Tobin's trial for the murder of Angelika Kluk began in March 2007.
Well, this trial lasted for weeks.
I mean, this was a forensic case. That really was the crucial evidence in the case. I gave evidence for 2.5 days. It was awful. Yeah, it was awful.
He was convicted and he was sentenced to life in prison. It was an overwhelming, verdict, and rightly so. It was justice, but you'll never bring back Angelika Kluk. But, I was delighted. I was proud of the fact that I had run an investigation which had a lot of complications in it, but there was more to follow, and that was Anagram. Job's not done yet. Peter Tobin was convicted of the murder of Angelika Kluk. That was job done. The next stage is a vital part, and that was when we went public as regards Operation Anagram.
Convinced that Tobin was a serial killer, police nationwide under Operation Anagram worked tirelessly to link him with other unsolved missing persons and murder cases across Britain.
He lived in addresses all over the UK. Glasgow, Paisley, Bathgate. And in England, he lived in Brighton, Eastbourne, Margate, Havant. These are the places that we know that he frequented and he stayed in, and suspect that he committed criminality in these areas. Anagram became a UK-wide operation, and we started to identify things. And in that, we identified the missing person, Dinah McNichol.
She was just a really, really nice girl. There was a year's age difference between us, and she was just lovely. We were best friends, worst enemies, and everything in between.
Dinah McNichol, she was at a concert, the Lip Hoop Festival, and she met another friend, a guy, and both of them left the festival and they were hitchhiking back. A Scottish person picked them up and there's some conversation in the car. They drive so far along, the car stops, and the boyfriend that she was with at that time, he leaves the car and the Scottish person drives away. Next thing, nothing else is seen. She's not found, she's disappeared.
She was supposed to come to a party with me, and when she hadn't checked in for that party, that's when I realised that something wasn't right. The friends that she'd been to the previous festival with, we'd rung them and they hadn't heard from her either. And that was when the alarm bell started ringing and we phoned the police then.
When I was pushing Operation Anagram and I would open up a conference, I would say, if anyone in this room loses a loved one, they would want to know what happened to them, if they've disappeared or were killed. My search strapline for what I do, search for the truth. Leave no stone unturned.
Within yourself, there's always 5% of hope. So for 16 years, you always cling on to that hope.
There was stuff that indicated perhaps a connection at that time between Dinah McNichol and Margate, because her bank card had been used at machines all the way along, which would be the route from where she was picked up to Margate, where Peter Tobin lived. But the bigger connection then came in suspicion about Tobin, because Tobin had been in Robertson Avenue in Bathgate. He'd done a house swap with Irvine Drive in Margate. So there was quite a lot of things that were starting to come into it. The detective superintendent got a warrant and a team, specialist officers, went to Irvine Drive in Margate. There was a witness traced that spoke about Tobin digging a big hole, huge hole in his garden, which he described to this individual as a sandpit, but he had to fill it in because the social work were concerned about his kids. Specialist officers conducted excavations at the targeted search where we believed he'd been digging that hole.
For 16 years, they're still looking for a missing person. And then you get a telephone call saying, actually, it might be a body.
And I can remember to this day what I was doing when I got a phone call saying they had found a woman's body in that garden. Immediately said, I take it it's Dinah McNichol. I said, no, it's not. It's Vicky Hamilton.
The blue tarpaulin covers the shallow grave where they found 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton's body.
We were watching it on the news and they said they'd found a body in Margate, Kent. But then again, they come back and told us that it was definitely Vicky. What they did to Vicky, I couldn't have ate a rabbit. Definitely couldn't have. I was really sick, absolutely sick.
It came as a great shock because it is very dangerous and complicated to transport a body hundreds and hundreds of miles.
I said, look, indications, you know, there's a strong connection with Dinah. Keep digging. And they kept searching and excavating that area. And then I got contacted the following day to say that they had found Dinah McNichol nearby.
It was a shock. It was more closure rather than anything else. When they found her, then at least we knew and able to grieve properly.
I couldn't believe it. It was a mixture of shocked and, upset. I believed he was a killer, a serial killer. The bodies were in plastic polythene bags. There was DNA evidence in Vicky. There was DNA evidence from Tobin in Dinah. There was fingerprints of Tobin on the plastic bags that they were encased in the garden. There was overwhelming evidence, and it just so happens that 2 dead bodies are buried in his garden.
In December 2008, Peter Tobin was tried and found guilty of the murder of Vicky Hamilton, and then a year later in 2009, of the murder of Dinah McNichol. He was given 2 further life sentences.
The families of Angelika Kluk, Dinah McNichol and Vicky Hamilton know what happened to their loved ones. And I like to think that I have helped them in some way. And, you know, there is some justice. But how do you ever bring back a life? It's professionalism, it's what I try and do to help people, but you know, you can't measure that. And for me, it's emotions, it's about pride in what I did and pride in what I still do.
The judge said, I'm putting you away, he says, for the rest of your life. And I couldn't have been any happier. I couldn't have been any happier in this world.
It's very difficult. How can you justify the death of someone? You can't justify that. He's serving the rest of his life behind bars. He will never ever see a beautiful day again.
It's a massive relief when they are convicted. It's like an enormous weight lifted off your shoulders. It really is. Because it's something you carry with you. The whole thing is a tragedy played out over a long period of time.
I think she touched a lot of people's lives. Definitely a lot of people, especially the police. And I love Vicky a bit, and I'll always love her.
She's just such a lovely person, she really was. It's just so tragic. She would have had a beautiful life, she really would.
Just the investigation became an obsession. And the pressures that were on me as an individual dealing with this was immense. I was a very experienced senior investigating officer, but to deal with trying to comprehend what Tobin had done, and for me, trying to make sure that I had done everything, because I was always in the horrors every night, you know, worrying about what was going to be reported, what had been going to be leaking in newspapers. I lived this. I lived it with my team. This was a huge, high-profile, tragic case, and it's one I'll never forget.